So today I'd like to talk about events in history. Today's the 5th of November. In England they celebrate Guy Fawkes Night, which is they burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes. And so Guy Fawkes was involved in a gunpowder plot which failed. Some would say fortunately, some would say unfortunately, to blow up all the members of Parliament and King James I. So that was in 1605. He was caught and then he was put to death by the government. And in 1872, Susan B. Anthony was fined $100 for trying to vote in a presidential election. Oh, how far we've come since then. $100, that was a lot of money back then. Gosh. In 1963, archaeologists found the remains of a Viking settlement in Newfoundland. So, I guess Columbus wasn't the first one here. So it was Native Americans, Vikings, Columbus, in that order probably. In 1994, George Foreman became the world's oldest heavyweight champion at 45. That's amazing. 45 years old. So, November the 5th, pretty significant day in history in my opinion. So, today I wanted to talk about the world that we're living in right now. And what kind of world are we trying to build? We see different models around the world. Different countries have had different ideas on how to govern their people. We see, for instance, in North Korea, a system of repression and intimidation to govern its people. In the former USSR, they used to have these elections. That's what they called them. And basically, there were two booths, and one was in the public, and that was if you voted against the government, and one was in a curtain, and that was if you were voted for the government. So it was a big deal for these repressive governments to get elected because they wanted legitimacy. They were craving legitimacy, and they knew very well that they weren't really legitimate governments, but they craved legitimacy. So they had these elections, and they would sometimes get, in Stalin's case, more votes in his district than than there were people living there. And the communist government at the time would say, well, people are so enthusiastic to vote for Joseph Stalin that they left their own district and came to another district to vote for him. That was their explanation. So we know in this democratic society that we live in that people have a lot of choices, and an elected official never, doesn't always get a majority of the vote, maybe just over 50% or just under 50%. That's normal for a democratic society. In other countries, not America for instance, in other countries, getting 30% is quite normal, and then you have to form a coalition with other parties in order to have power. In communist countries, guess how many percentage of the people vote for their candidate? 100%. So there's 100% of the people who are eligible to vote, and all of them want this one candidate. So it's really so that is a repressive society, and it works. Ruling people under the pain of death, it works. It's very powerful. If I point a gun at your head and tell you to do something, you're probably going to do it, unless of course you have a suicide wish, or
you're Kai.
or you're my son. But Kai's never here to defend himself.
I keep inviting
It's not fair. You keep inviting him, that's true. Yeah, anyway, he can watch the tape later. Okay, but then what's the opposite of repression? There's absolute freedom. And that's a scary thing for most governments. Most governments in the world cannot consider or conceive of the idea of letting people just do whatever they want. I mean, it's a scary thought. But what does the principle teach us? What is the principle encouraging us to go towards? What kind of government, world order, what kind of system of governance does the principle encourage or have a vision of creating? When we think about the rules in the principle, when we think about the laws of the universe, those laws, when we're growing up, for instance, we resent our parents for passing laws of the house. We resent our parents for not letting us do whatever we want. Do we not? I'm experiencing a lot of pushback from my kids. Every time I lay down a rule, it's not always appreciated for some reason. And yet, when we as parents consider what is the purpose of laws, is it to create misery? Or is it to create something better than that? And of course we would always argue that it's to create something better. And in order to create something better, sometimes certain restrictions need to be made. I don't know if we can all agree on that, but in our limited wisdom as parents, we sometimes make bad choices about what restrictions we're going to make on our kids. We sometimes make poor choices on what types of things we're going to fight about with our kids. But on the whole, we have their best interest in mind, and that is why we set up certain rules and regulations. In the kingdom of heaven, if you can imagine what that would look like, I imagine a society where people are not governed by laws, but rather they're governed by a sense of devotion to God and to each other, and a sense of responsibility to God and to each other. I imagine a society where, if you think about the original human ancestors, how many commandments or laws did they need to abide by in order to live in the environment that they lived in? And really there was just one rule. And even that one rule would have been taken away when they had reached maturity. So the purpose of rules, from God's point of view, is to protect us. The purpose of laws, from God's point of view, is not to create misery or to restrict us in any way, but rather to shape us and mold us into being all we can be, into becoming perfected human beings. So what kind of society are we living in, and what kind of society are we trying to build? Well, if we look at the society that we're living in, here are some images that come to mind. We've got fighting on all levels. We've got fighting in ourselves. Do it! No, don't do it. Do it! No, don't do it. We've got fighting amongst each other, spouses. We've got fighting between parents and children. We've got fighting amongst families, amongst communities. We got fighting on a more macro level amongst society. We got fighting in politics. We got fighting between races. We got fighting between religions. We got fighting everywhere. I mean, people are just not getting along. And is that the ideal? Was that why God invested so much in building this world? Because he wanted to see this fight scene play out like some kind of evil video game master? Like, let's see how this works out. If that's the kind of God that created this universe, then what's the point? No. We clearly understand from a divine principle point of view what the intention of God was. And even after the fall, when that intention got completely derailed, what God's intention is now, which was the same as it was back then. So what did God promise us? Again, it's good to be reminded, the three great blessings: to be fruitful, to have mind and body unity, centered on money? No. Wait, God, yes. To multiply, to raise God-centered families, and to have a God-centered dominion over the earth. That was the promise. But what kind of world are we living in right now? We have mind and body unity, right? A lot of people do. Centered on self. What do you put at that top part? You know, the 4-position foundation, mind, body, unity, centered on. That's important. What do you put in that blank box up there? Do you put God? Do you put self? My family, that's the only important thing in this world. Money? Does that go in the box up there? Mind and body centered on money. Mind and body centered on revenge. Mind and body centered on what? We have broken families. Probably one of the main reasons why people are fighting amongst themselves is because from the get-go they were not in a family that was able to understand or receive love. And I'm talking about even families where the husband and wife stay together. There's a lot of cruelty and animosity going on in those families. Right now we see this this kind of national purging going on, especially in Hollywood. It's finally getting purged. It's going a little crazy too, but you can see a lot of people are being accused of all kinds of, improprieties. I think Kevin Spacey was the latest person to be named as someone who is victimizing and potentially, these are all just allegations at this point, but when you look at Kevin Spacey's childhood, I'm not making an excuse for this guy, but if he did these things, he should, suffer the consequences. But if you look at his childhood, his father joined the Nazi party and shaved his mustache to look like Hitler, used to beat his children, and I'm glad there's no younger members in this audience except my son over there. But he did things to his children that should never have happened. And meanwhile, his mother allowed it to happen. Okay? So there you have parents who stick together in a family, but it's broken, it's torn, it's rotten from the inside. So sometimes, if you, for instance, were the mother who was married to this kind of man, and your children were being abused by him, in that case, it would probably be better to separate from this kind of person. So, now I'm just saying, there's people who have been messed up from the get-go, and they are acting out their messed up psyche on the next generation. And it's really, really sad. The sins of the father are passed down. So we got broken families. Not God-centered families, in other words. The opposite of God-centered families. And then we have a lot of dominion over the environment. We talk a lot about nature. You saw those beautiful scenes, right? It is nice to go to beautiful parts of nature, but it is not especially pleasant to have to live in nature. Nature is really harsh and really difficult. I was hearing this testimony of this guy who from Canada who used to, when he was 18, after he left high school, he went gold panning in the Canadian wilderness. And he says, I'm telling you now that nature is not so pleasant. It's not this, nature, I'm going to take care of you. It's more like, I will chew you up and spit you out unless you can survive. That's nature. But for us, a lot of the times, the city dwellers, we go to the beach. Oh, it's beautiful. We walk, we hike in these beautiful environments. We got the spray on our face. We got these little bottles, and we create, cocoons of comfort around ourselves whilst we go into nature. So we have a lot of dominion over nature, especially in the city. But even when we venture into nature, we have a lot of dominion over the situation. And if all else fails, we have these beacons. We can just sort of, oh, I'm lost. I have no idea where I am. Beacon, GPS system goes out, and then rescue boats come to wherever you are in the ocean. But dominating the environment centered on what? The buildings that we put up, the way we exploit nature. What do we do it for? And are we doing it to create the kingdom of heaven on earth? To create a comfortable living environment? Or sometimes we're just creating mayhem and destruction because we don't really know how nature works and how to manage it. Okay, we're very bad gardeners going out into the garden and creating a mess instead of creating a beautiful garden. All right, that's the extent of our ignorance. So how many times have human beings tried to meddle with one part of nature without realizing how it's all interconnected? And then, you go in and you spray pesticide on this plant, and then the next thing you know, there's no bees. What happened to the bees? We want the bees, we just didn't want the aphids, Oh, I'm sorry, but they're all connected, You have to manage it in a different way. You have to be more able to understand how to be a good gardener in order to practice gardening. So, the world we're living in, we are practicing the 3 blessings. But we're practicing them not being centered on God. When you think about the order in which they're in, mind and body unity, family, environment, what are we doing first? What are we focusing on first in today's world? I gotta get a good education, I gotta get a good job because I gotta make a lot of money, all right? That's blessing number 3. That's money and dominion and power. I've got to have a lot of that. And then when I got a lot of money, then I can get married. And when I have kids, I can start to figure out how to be a decent human being. It's almost like...
Confession or
This is confession time. I'm sorry, Toa. I'm sorry, Pia. I have a secret to tell you. I'm not perfect. Sorry. So, I wanted to wrap up this Sunday service by reminding us that the world we're living in is a broken world. Why? Because fundamentally we're missing God. Fundamentally. I mean, when you look at all the world systems, the government systems, the systems where people are trying to create a better world, when they leave out God, it's always doomed to fail. Even when they have God, they have very strange ideas about God. Why are so many people disillusioned about Christianity? It's because Christianity has had some really weird ideas about what God is and what God wants. Okay? How God operates. And so because of that, people haven't been able to relate even with a fundamentally good religion. For instance, if you think about communism is all, on paper, communism makes a lot of sense. It's people living in communes, helping each other, blah, blah, blah. Righteous people have been suckered by communism for over 100 years. But in reality, whenever there's communism, it doesn't work. It fails. And it ruins people's lives. And when you think about democracy, even democracy, the world we're living in right now, is the country we're living in right now claims to be a democracy, but it doesn't really fulfill all the functions of a democracy. And what is the ideology of a democracy? It keeps changing anyway. So, what should we have our faith in? Should we have our faith, put all our faith in a political party, in a political candidate? If so, then you are destined to be disappointed. You are destined to be heartbroken. When your political candidate falls down or makes a scandal or does some really dumb thing, as all people do, then you are going to be very disappointed, very disillusioned. Or should we put our faith in an unchanging ideal, which is what God has laid out for us? And even though we fall down and the people who are trying to chase after this ideal fall down, but the ideal still remains. The absolute nature of God still stays intact, despite the fact that people who are chasing after it, trying to accomplish it, keep falling down, keep sliding down the mountain. You're climbing up a mountain and these people like falling left, right, and center, and you just, okay, I'm going to try and make it, I'm not going to judge you guys for failing because I might fail, but let's all just keep trying to accomplish this ideal. First of all, in our individual families, in our individual selves, rather. What are we doing every day, for instance, in order to accomplish this ideal? Are we reading? Are we studying? Are we analyzing? We should really try to get to the truth of who we are and what we're good at, what we're not good at, what we need to work on, etc. That's part of the first blessing. We need to really create mind-body unity by centering it on an ideal. And we also need to listen. We need to see from this point of view of God's. What I really, when I look at the political news these days, what strikes me more now than it did before was that everybody wants a better world. The left wants a better world, the right wants a better world, everybody wants a better world. Everybody can see problems, but we're all going about it in a very aggressive, very toxic, very judgmental way. And of course, if you do that, if you're kind of very demanding about your way is the right way and that way is the wrong way, if you're like that, then the people don't want to listen to you. And if people are not listening to you, then you can't create this ideal. You can't create a better world if half the people living in it don't even want to have anything to do with you. So we have to find a way to bridge the gap. For instance, whatever political party you're in, try to understand the viewpoint of people on the opposite side. And that involves listening and biting. Biting your tongue. I don't know what side of abortion you're on, but both sides have a valid point of view. Try to find someone on the opposite side of that issue and listen to what they have to say. And listen and bite your tongue. I don't know what political party you're in, but whatever political party that you affiliate with more closely, try to listen and understand the viewpoint of those on the other side, and listen and bite your tongue. So listen and bite. It's probably not. If you remember one thing from this Sunday service, like listen and bite. What was he talking about? Orthodontist? Yeah. Dentist? What? And then, of course, we should see a need and we should provide a solution. This is the essence of creating a better society. And this is how we have so many goods and services in circulation in the environment that we live in, is because people have been given freedom to see a need and provide a solution for that need. And the people that have done that very successfully have become very wealthy, as well as given a tremendous thing for the rest of us. When I was in Ireland earlier this year, I was invited to a family reunion. And I went to this agricultural museum. And in this agricultural museum, I went around these life-size huts that the Irish peasants built out of mud and sticks. And basically it was just a hut with a door. There was no windows because there was no glass. It was just a door and walls. And then they had this little plaque outside of how difficult it was to be a peasant back in the 19th century, 18th century. and basically how these peasants, they had nothing. They had no tenure over they had no ownership over the land they built these huts on. They were basically living hand to mouth. They were completely exposed to the whims of nature. So if there was a bad harvest, then you're just going to starve. And these Irish immigrants, they decided, okay, this isn't working. They were dying by the millions. And they came to America. And in the environment of America, they were able to establish themselves and do really, really well. And it just struck me, like, what is the greatness of this country? Is it the people? Or is it the opportunity that was there? And I think it's obvious what it was. What made this country so spectacularly successful in a short space of time was that it had a system of government that allowed people to go about their business and do the best that they could do without being restricted by all these laws and taxes and government intervention, etc., etc. Which is, so for instance, the Irish, back in Ireland, they were dying. They were vulnerable and they were dying. Same Irish, transplant them over into American soil, and now they have an opportunity to develop themselves, to develop their families, and so on and so forth, and do really well. So, the kingdom of heaven is a world where people are going to be free to express their genius. It's going to be a world where people can really make their own individual contributions and make that world a better place, and do well themselves and provide good things for others. So, if we are building this kingdom of heaven, and we are in really a very good country where we can pretty much do whatever it is that our heart takes us in the direction of, we're not really going to come up against any roadblocks yet. That might change. But we're in an environment where, unlike the Irish peasants in Ireland, we are now the Irish peasants who have been transplanted into America, and we're able to go forth and work hard and do whatever it is that we feel we need to do. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought that we need to go back again and again to revisit the three great blessings. And remember, this is the promise. This has always been the promise, and it continues to be the promise and the goal of God and human beings to accomplish that world where we can be free, truly free. And it's a freedom that exists outside the realm of laws, outside the realm of government restrictions, etc. Those are only there really to protect each other from each other's selfishness. If you think about it, what is the purpose of laws? Is to protect each other from each other's selfishness. Why do we have speeding limits? Some people are capable of driving safely at 150 miles an hour. They're called Formula One drivers. They've really, really got sharp reflexes and they have no problem with speed. But we can't have them on the roads driving at 150 miles an hour. That's just not going to work. So for the sake of, safety, we've all come to this conclusion that we need to have speed limits. But, in an ideal world, wouldn't it be that people would drive according to their sense of safety? Probably you wouldn't need a law hanging over your head threatening to fine you. You would think, okay, I'm in a busy parking lot. I should not hit the accelerator. If people develop that sense of consciousness, if people develop that sense of respect for one another's life, if people develop that sense of love and care for each other, they are going to drive accordingly. Right? So in an environment like that, you wouldn't need all these laws threatening to come at you if you misbehaved. you would just naturally not want to do anything antisocial. You would naturally not want to do anything that would, threaten the lives of other people. So think about what it is that God is trying to create. Think about what it is that you are trying to create in your own life. And let's try to meet God in the middle. Please join me in prayer. Our Heavenly Parents, thank you so much for never giving up on us. We truly appreciate your love, your bounteous love, your undying love for each and every one of us. And when we think about such love, we feel a sense of shame that we have not been able to meet our own expectations of ourselves, and probably most certainly not the expectations that you have on each and every one of us. But rather than judge us, you just simply keep trying to connect to us, trying to encourage us, trying to help us to grow and to develop and to become. And you're never trying to squash us or push us down or punish us, but rather you are trying to guide us. You are trying to mold us. You're trying to help us to realize a world of freedom that exists beyond what we can experience right now. So we want to take this opportunity to consider what it is that we are doing in our life and what it is that we would like to try and do in order to better ourselves, better our families, and better the world that we're living in. We thank you and we offer you this prayer through Christ our Lord, our Jew, and Amen.